and welcome to day one of the TooFatLardies 2024 Advent Calendar. Here we go again with 24 new windows on our calendar for you to open each day on the run up to Christmas. And don't forget, on Christmas Day, we're going to be joining you with our Christmas Day podcast. So we hope that you will stay with us throughout the whole festive period. Each day, as previously, we're going to be opening up a window and seeing what the question is inside. So I'm going to start with the first one here and open it up. And here we go. A piece of paper here, folded up by one of the elves. Does size matter? When designing a war game, how does your approach differ when dealing with a skirmish with 40 or so figures and that of a battle such as Waterloo or Königgrätz with thousands and thousands of troops present? Well, that is a question. Size does matter. It informs. The visual aspect of any war game is very, very important. The great chef will tell you that we dine with our eyes as much as with our stomachs. And having a meal that looks wonderful set out before us anticipates, it enhances our anticipation and our enjoyment of that meal. So I guess the first thing is when I'm considering starting a new period or designing a new game, my first thought would be, what do I want the game to look like? What aspects of it are going to be the ones that determine everything else that comes in after that? So, for example, when I did some work during lockdown on the Italian wars, I knew I wanted great big pipe blocks. And that then means you can't have 20 of them because the table size is just going to be ridiculous. So, it is important to think about that. What am I keen to see happen? Now, I've had a thought looking at the Perry miniatures figures for the Franco-Prussian War, a period that I've always been interested in. A brigade size game with around 48 figures per battalion would really be appealing to me, allowing a 12-figure company, which is a decent unit in its own right. So the first thing I would do is think about what does a unit represent. There's no point in having a 33-figure Prussian battalion because they're made up of 4 companies. So you need to make sure that you're going to have that balance going down to the level that is going to be represented in the game. The fact that I'm considering that representing individual companies means that I'm limiting the size of the game to probably around a brigade. So you would be looking at having 24 companies on that table, which would be a big game in its own right if they were all deployed into companies. So deciding what a unit is going to represent and how that's going to happen is important. But you also need to decide what the battlefield represents, what the scale is, what distances mean. And that then determines how terrain is used. There's no point in representing a tiny mill stream if the battle is going to be as large as 200,000 men on each side. In that situation, the stream becomes irrelevant. However, in a game like Sharp Practice, the stream can be everything. And where there are patches of soft ground, where there's marsh, where there is a ford, all of this becomes absolutely critical in a game of a different size. But what the battlefield represents is also informed by what a unit represents. A lot of people talk about scale as being a restrictor, ground scale, time scale as being a restrictor in game design. And I know many game designers who simply don't bother with it in terms of saying how long a turn is or how far a distance is. But for me, I find that actually is liberating and informative in that knowing what a unit looks like, knowing what the frontages of that unit would be historically, allows me to decide what size the table needs to be. So if I'm going to be representing 6 battalions, and each of whom has got a formed frontage of 120 yards, that then tells me, 6 of those, we're looking at 720 yards, and that's determining that's half a mile of pure frontage if they're all lined up shoulder to shoulder. So the battlefield needs to be at least a mile across in order to give space to maneuver and have flanks that mean anything. So simply taking those issues of scale, we're starting to get a feel for what we're looking at. But what does time represent? Well, in any game, I think a turn or a phase of play needs to be a sufficient amount of time to allow things that are important to happen. So in chain of command, running across that road, which is a matter of a few seconds, is important, because at what point does the enemy react to your behavior? If you know that you can move 6 inches or 8 inches or whatever the fixed distance is before your enemy can react, you know you can run across that road. So in a game where we're talking about a relatively small number of figures, time has to be premium in terms of we're talking seconds rather than minutes, whereas in a big battle game, 1 minute is irrelevant. A minute in the Battle of Waterloo is insignificant, whereas 15 minutes in a skirmish, you may as well roll a dice to see which side has won and go down the pub, because 15 minutes could be the entire game time. Then once you've decided on what your game is going to look like, you need to work out what aspect of command you're looking to represent. And that will then inform the way the design is going to do. In a game like Sharp Practice, you're looking at personal leadership, personal intervention, heroic in some cases, one would hope, where you get an individual actually mattering. What decisions they make matter, but also the way they behave matters. Do they place themselves at the head of their unit and make a difference? Or do they stand back and try and control with a clearer head? Big battles, on the other hand, tend not to be about individuals. It's much more about the machinations of a staff system, and rightly so. Once you get into World War II, if you're looking at large level games, you should be talking about the workings of a logistics system as well, and creating the circumstances on the battlefield through reconnaissance and through logistics that allow you then to win that battle at an operational level. Dave Brown does this well with Pickett's Charge and General d'Armée, with the use of staff officers or ADCs. Not only is a great game mechanism, but very specifically, it gives you a feel for what is happening. It's not General Lee or whoever who is actually dominating the battlefield. It's their staff who are doing the legwork, and that is allowing things to happen and improving the chances of getting the outcome that they want. Significant intervention from above in that type of game only really happens at key moments. If your general attaches themselves to a battalion in the front line in turn 1 of the Battle of Waterloo, they are very likely to lose any comprehension and idea of what is happening elsewhere on the battlefield. And that needs to be a penalty which is written into our game system. So, does size matter? Yes, it does, but only in terms of us using scale and using our vision of what we want a game to look like to inform what we are going to model on the table in terms of leadership. Because ultimately, it's firing is important, moving is important, but it is command and control which really reflects how battles are won and lost.